were completed here. But welcome everybody to 52 Living Ideas. Tonight is Dao De Jing, and we'll be covering verses 51 and 52. As always, type exclamation point in the chat to read your favorite verse that spoke to you. And we'll get started. Evanique, thank you.
Oh, no problem. So this is from John R. Mabry, God as Nature Sees God translation. 51. The Tao gives birth to all things. Nature's goodness nurtures them. Matter forms them. Environment shapes them. Therefore, all things cannot help but to respect the Tao and treasure goodness. Respect for the Tao and treasuring of goodness are not demanded of them. They do it naturally. So the Tao gives birth, nature goodness nurtures them, grows them, raises them, and enables them to mature, ripens them, nourishes and shelters them. The Tao gives birth, but does not possess, acts, but does not take credit, guides, but does not control. This is the mystery of goodness.
Thank you, Evanique. Next, we have Madeline, followed by David, then Margarita.
Hey, this is a translation by Jia-Fu Feng and Jane English. All things arise from Tao. They are nourished by virtue. They are formed from matter. They are shaped by environment. Thus, the 10,000 things all respect Tao and honor virtue. Respect of Tao and honor of virtue are not demanded, but they are in the nature of things. Therefore, all things arise from Tao. By virtue, they are nourished, developed, cared for, sheltered, comforted, grown, and protected. Creating without claiming, doing without taking credit, guiding without interfering, this is primal virtue.
Thank you very much, Madeline. I really like that version quite a bit. So next we have David, followed by Margarita, followed by Katie.
Great. Thanks, Joe. Let's see. I'm predicting a table from Jason, but we'll see.
Okay. I hope so.
The Tao gave birth to them. Virtue nourished them, gave to each its form, brought each to perfection, and gave to each its power. Therefore, among all created things, there is not one which does not honor the Tao and reverence virtue. And if the Tao is thus honored and virtue is thus reverenced, it is not because an edict went forth, it has always been so. Thus, the Tao gave birth to them, nourished them, made them grow, protected them, perfected them, to rear them and not possess them, to cook in them and lay no claim to them, to govern them and not be dependent upon them. Such is the mysterious power.
Thank you, David. Next up, we have Margarita.
I will read in Bahasa.
Thank you.
Tao yang menghidupi, kebajikan yang memelihara, benda yang mewujudkan, sifat yang menyempurnakan. Dari itu, segala makhluk tidak dapat semaunya memuja Tao dan memuliakan kebajikan. Karena justru dua aspek inilah yang menghidupi dan memelihara mereka. Keluhuran dari Tao dan kemuliaan dari kebajikan, walaupun tanpa diperintah, tetap senantiasa dilakukan dengan sewajarnya. Maka Tao menciptakan, memelihara, membesarkan, merawat, dan melindungi. Mencipta tanpa ingin memiliki, bekerja tanpa pamrih, memelihara tanpa kemauan menguasai. Inilah kebajikan yang sempurna.
Thank you so much for reading. Katie, you're next.
Okay, I was going to read the Stephen Mitchell version. Every being in the universe is an expression of the Tao. It springs into existence, unconscious, perfect, free, takes on a physical body, lets circumstances complete it. That is why every being spontaneously honors the Tao. The Tao gives birth to all things, nourishes them, maintains them, cares for them, comforts them, protects them, takes them back to itself, creating without possessing, acting without expecting, guiding without interfering. That is why love of the Tao is in the very nature of it.
Thank you, Katie. Allison.
The Tao gives life to all things. Virtue feeds them, matter shapes them, energy completes them. This is why all things honor the Tao and esteem virtue. Honor for the Tao and esteem for virtue arise spontaneously. For the Tao gives life to all creatures, and virtue nurtures them, raises them, nurtures, matures, and protects them. The Tao gives life freely, making no claim of ownership. Virtue forms them, but does not force them, raises them, but does not rule them. This is why virtue is profound.
Which version was that?
Oh, that's the Sam Turod version.
Okay, thank you. So if there isn't anyone else, we can go to Jason. I can actually read my version really quickly. I'll read the Ursula Le Guin. The way bears them, power nurtures them, their own being shapes them, their own energy completes them, and not one of the 10,000 things fails to hold the way sacred or to obey its power. Their reverence for the way and obedience to its power are unforced and always natural. For the way gives them life. Its power nourishes them, mothers and feeds them, completes and matures them, looks after them, protects them. To have without possessing, to do without claiming, lead without controlling. This is the mysterious power. Okay, Jason, would you like to go ahead and?
Okay, so I think this one probably everybody, most of the translation probably not much difference in general. So let me read the first 4 stanza. Okay, if you look at the Chinese, it's very simple, right? Like all end with this word, 知, that means them, you know. Okay, this word is interest word. Okay, so it used a lot. You will see this word, 知, you see how many you have. You see everything have end with this word. And then I make a count. I think this short one probably use this word 12 times. Okay, so this one can be anything. Okay, so can be something like things, stuff. Okay, so that's very common, not common in today's conversation, but it's a very common word in the ancient text. And this one is a lot. Okay, so basically the translation is just called them or whatever. You know, or you don't have to translate. So the first 4 stanza, the Tao give them life. Virtue or De raises them. Matter gives them shapes. Conditions are complete for them. Okay, so I think Katie asked a question about the matter and the energy. So the last word called shi. Actually, I really like these 4. I think in Chinese, they are very well because you can see the highest is Dao. And then Dao is like the beginning of everything. Then you have the De, okay, which we call the energy, virtue, whatever, something you can follow, something that can do something. Okay, so that's the second thing. Then remember, I think on the chapter 20, there's like the Tao have give the birth of one gives the two to three to everything. So basically, it's similar from Tao and the De, and then you create the matter, the stuff, okay, created. And the last one, Si. So you can see Tao and the De and the matters. Then the last one, some translation is energy, environmental. Okay, I think they all correct. And Shi, okay, that's a very Chinese word. Okay, but in Dao De Jing, we only use one time, only here. So we don't have to spend 2 hours to explain this word. But if we read the Art of War or the legalism, like Han Fei, then that means they have a lot of words like this. Okay, so it means Shi is important. And then let me take about 1 minute to explain what's Shi. Okay, and I think Amang probably have a different view. Well, probably not different because he is from Western culture, so he probably can explain much better. So Shi means condition, means environmental, means potential, means if you want to think about situation, you put a big rock on the mountain. So that means the big boulder, the big rock is going to fall down, but haven't fall down yet. Or you pen up water on the high mountain, but you haven't opened the gate yet. The water is holding there. So you are ready to open the gate or the pen, that water flush down. So this one we call Shi. Okay, and it's very important in the military, in the strategy. If you play chess, okay, if you play the Chinese Go, if you have a Chinese master or Eastern West Asian master to teach you how to play Go, they will tell you Shi, the condition, the potentiality, the environment, how to lay out everything. So basically, if you look this one, you will see lay out very well, from the Tao, from the De, and to the matter. Then after that, everything is ready. Okay, so I think that's this chapter is talking about. And the rest is much simpler. Talk about, for this reason, all things honor Tao and the value De. The honor and the value are Tao's and the De's own unchanging way. The word 常, without the claim of others. That means the value and the honor are its nature. It's not because some claim or some from outside force. So that's what we talk about. Therefore, the Tao gives them life. De, which is virtue, raises them. The others, I think most are the same. The different translation just depend on the English words you are choosing. Basically talking about cultivating them, raising them, mellowing and mature them, tending them, and shielding them. And the last line, the last 4 stanza, I think they are repeat from chapter 10. So a lot of people think about, a lot of scholars think about the chapter 10, the last 4 stanzas are redundant. So there probably some mistake. So a lot of version, they take out this 4 from the chapter 10. Only keep in this one because it's logically doesn't match in chapter 10 and it fit better here. So if you go back to chapter 10, you will find out the last 4 stanzas are the same. So it could be some mistake or the reason. So here we just repeat the translation. Producing them without possessing, working for them without flaunting, raising them without dominating. This is the profound De. Okay, this one called Xuan De. Okay, it has been used 2 times. Okay, in Dao De Jing. So again, De you can consider as virtue or energy, and the Xuan, I think in the chapter 1 we talked this one before, and this one you probably will see many times. So Xuan means the color. Purple, red become very deep red, so kind of like a purple, and become black. So if you talk about color, it's like very, very dark purple, so almost like black. So you have like a feeling of profound, mystic, mysterious feeling. So I translate as a profound de, and then the profound also means mysterious. Okay, so they have the mysterious meaning, and then de also have the other than virtue, also have the meaning of power. So that's the whole chapter talking about. Yeah, that's it. Thank you. You are
Thank you.
muted.
Yeah, sorry about that. Thank you, Jason. Now, folks, type exclamation point to give your takeaway from this particular verse. Aman, would you like to get us started? Thank you.
Well, I wanted to comment on what Jason was saying about those first 4 stanzas, because this really seems to be the most sort of synthesizing of the verses in the Dao De Jing so far, where the Dao and De are both iterated and reiterated and reiterated, and they are sort of put in this hierarchy in those first 4 of the Dao, the De, matters, and Shi are conditions. I just wanted to say a little bit as sort of a refresher of what we're talking about here. The Dao is something beyond discussion, but we do that anyway. And it is this sort of limitless potentiality, this open field of fertility. The way I kind of like to think about it here is that any of us can have any sort of fantasy or dream. We all want to write the next great American novel or whatever it is. That's a Dao. We all have that potential. We all have that concept or that potentiality, that fertility for it. Most of us will never write it because life happens, and because to really take that concept from an idea into a reality manifested requires this idea of de, this virtue or animus, to actually get it from a potentiality into a manifestation. And that's reflected again in the last 2 lines of the matters that are shaped for them. Matter allows whatever our concepts are to have a tangibility. There's something there that comes from our actions. And this idea of shi, of potential momentum, is one way I like to sort of interpret it. And that idea of a boulder sitting on a hill or water pent up behind a dam gives this image of, all right, so there was an idea, there was an action to its completion, and all the pieces came together to make it fit. Now it's just waiting for that one more ingredient to burst into its next transformation, its next manifestation. I do think that it encapsulates, this is sort of a recipe of action. First, get clear with your Tao, then animate it with virtue. Place your pieces correctly like a go board, and then let the matter unravel like it naturally will. This idea of like that potential momentum isn't waiting for you to make the boulder fall or make the dam burst. It happens when it happens naturally, and your sensitivity to it, your perception of it, your clarity to in tune when it will occur is what will allow you to sort of ride the crest the best possible way. So I just wanted to sort of bring that up front and center in this chapter, because it is the preamble that is all sort of put there for the taking, but takes a little unpacking.
Yeah, it does. Actually, there's, as always, fantastic comments. Yeah, one of the things that I kind of to that puts into context for me is the idea without controlling or possessing something, where you're letting something like the natural momentum emerge from nature. And that's kind of what I've taken from you, what you've just given us. Would that be somewhat in line with what you just said?
Yeah, that
Yeah.
would be the visible end result, but there
Right.
are at least 3 steps precursory that should really be taken into consideration. How you conceive it, how you animate it, how you prepare for it, all are there even before you wait patiently for that natural eruption to occur.
As always, fantastic comments. So, okay, next we have Evanique.
Yeah, so I think the second part of this poem is what spoke to me. So it starts with, so the Tao gives birth, nature's goodness nurtures them, grows them, raises them, and enables them to mature, ripens them, nourishes them, and shelters them. The Tao gives birth but does not possess, act, or does not take credit, guide, or does not control. So the way I look at it is, like God gives birth, or the Tao gives birth, and then, allows nature to kind of take its course in the growing and development of a person. So, if we're that creation, like, we should be allowing nature to take control and grow us, and not try to control everything that happens to us, because we can't, number one. And number two, it's good for us. I mean, it's going to help us on this growth in this journey. And I'm not talking about like things like violence or anything like that, although you can say, could say that, you could grow from that, but I'm not talking about that. I'm just talking about, like, the things that happen in life, the good, the bad, the grief that we have to go through, that every person will have to go through. They'll have to suffer from some type of grief, some type of loss. Let that shape us. And that's what it is. It shapes us. And it doesn't always feel good to grow. It just doesn't, but we do it anyway. And that's why I said it gives birth but does not possess. It's like we get to choose our journey or adventure. And it acts but doesn't take credit. It's like, but I guess if you believe in a spiritual power, is what this is saying, it'll, you could find peace, but it doesn't take credit. It's you that's taking the action. And you're allowing the Tao to guide you, but the Tao is not taking control, because you're the unique person. You are the Tao's creation, and you got to have control over what you can control. It's kind of like stoicism. You control what you can control, and then whatever else happens, you can control how you react to it. And that's all we can control. So we can't control it. We can't possess this life, but we can do our best to choose our adventure and just control what we can, and control our own desire for what we can control. That's my take.
Thank you, Evanique. Katie.
Yeah, I'm looking at the last paragraph too, and I think the only place where I disagree a little bit with the Tao Te Ching is like protecting all of creation. I think that would be a good description for maybe like a human family, and maybe protecting your own family, but it's a very different. They have a very different view of nature in this time.
Thanks, Katie. Next we have Madeline.
Okay. I was thinking that when I was looking at Jason's translation, and as well as what's in my book, I was thinking that it's very specific in a way. When you talk about potential force, that it would be like, say, a rock on top of a mountain or water on top of a dam. So all the different things that the Tao energy does when you get into the groove of your De, your virtue, it seems sort of like dharma or karma, that you have to align yourself with what that energy is there for, rather than say, well, okay, there's this energy for shielding, but I don't want that. I don't want the energy for shielding. I want the energy for growth, or, you know, I don't want the energy of a rock coming down a mountain. I want the energy of a seed bursting out of its shell, or whatever it is. So that part of the virtue is in aligning yourself with the forces that are there and available to you. I don't know if that's a correct interpretation or if I'm just projecting.
That's interesting. Jason or Armand, would you like to comment on that? How that it is more about alignment?
Okay, let me have some comment on this. You talk about, I just have to say the four things in this one are Dao and De and the matter and Shi. I will kind of consider them as in a certain sequential, right? You have the Tao to give the birth for everything, then they have the De. If let's think about the beginning of the universe, right? We have the Tao, and then we have the kind of like energy something. Then we have the creation, right? Kind of like in Bible, right? The ex nihilo, right? So we create things, okay? Then everything formed, okay? That's what it is. That's the Shi, because in this world, it being in this condition, they have the nature way how it's going to do. A little bit similar, like, you know, you talk about Dharma or Karma, but I think that's probably a little bit too far away. But it kind of like that's the world being created. That's the condition. Then this chapter start to talk about. They talk about like the creation. That's considered the creation of the universe. So that's what we have, and then everything, including people, we should respect the Tao and the De, okay, and the value Tao, respect Tao and the value De, and their value is not like a religion, okay, you have to do it, you have to follow it. No, because it's nature, okay, in this way. So then keep talking about in this world, okay, everything is cultivating it's cultivated by Tao, raised by Tao, and then growing, protected by the Tao, you know, then blah, 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 talk about, and then Tao is producing everything, but never claim the ownership, you know, raising everything, but never dominate everything, just as is. And this one, we call it the profound Tao, also mysterious energy. So I think that's the whole chapter try to say. And I think that's my understanding, you know. So that's the way I understand, and I think logically it's like this. So of course you have a different opinion. That's nature, but you know that's the way I read it this way. Yeah.
Aman.
I hate jumping ahead. I agree with Jason. I do think that there is a cosmological element to this chapter where it's explaining this is how the universe comes about. This is how things within the universe come about. As much as there's an ethical element to it of this is how you go about taking on action. This is how you should be thoughtful and considerate in taking on action. To kind of tie the idea of what Madeline was talking about and the question Katie posed in the chat there a little bit, plus this disagreement about the virtues, the cultivating, raising, mellowing, maturing, tending, shielding, producing, working, raising. All of these are the profound virtues or the profound that we see, or that we see in the Tao, in nature. When it talks about doing this for things, it's not things discretely one against another. It's the totality of things. And so the Tao doesn't protect the worm that came up too early to be eaten by the bird because it treats all like straw dogs. But that bird eating that worm consumes it, transforms the energy, gives back to the land, becomes a meal for another thing. And so the totality of it is being recycled, is being transformed continuously. And that is what is protected, shielded, nurtured, cultivated, mellowed, and matured, I think, as much as anything else. In the same way as this is advice to a leader, this is how you are to look at your kingdom, not with any particular discretion towards one thing or another, but in caring for, nurturing, protecting, shielding the totality of all. In that one sense of this being a duty of the leader, there is a parallel to the Indian concept of dharma, but dharma is much more particular duty for a particular person because of their station, and that duty is to be done regardless of circumstance. That's almost what you who are doing the Bhagavad Gita, the argument between Arjuna and Vishnu is all about. The circumstance is untenable. I don't want to do my duty, but it is your duty and therefore you must do it. That's much more directive and dictatorial, in a sense. In this, it is, if this is your overriding concern, the good of all, the nurturing, the shielding, the caring of all, then you need to be cognizant and very sensitive to the changings of conditions. And even if you may want to march your army out onto a battlefield, if you look to the sky, look to the heaven and see cloud fronts that tell you, hey, maybe there's a cold snap coming in and the ground's going to freeze hard, as advantageous and as beneficial as I think it would be for me to march into that land right now, I need to be aware of that and take a beat, because the other army may not be as sensitive. And while they make the march in the morning, they're all going to be frozen to death, and you will have prepared wisely because you watch conditions accordingly. This is the depths within depths of good or good virtue that one is supposed to emulate, which is the greatest of all things.
Thank you so much for that. Jason, did you want to say something to that? I mean, I'm sorry, Margarita's waiting, but
Yeah, I think Alma already said, what I want to say in a much better way. So anyway, I just one thing that I will add on is we can consider this chapter. Okay, if you look at the Dao De Jing's high score, okay, he is telling on the political or personal view, talking about like the world is like this naturally. Everything is worked this way. They are okay. Okay, that's the best way. Is don't interrupt. That's the way. And this chapter is one of the argument. Okay, so if you take a higher point of view, the 81 chapters, basics we're going to tell you is let's assume a prince, how to rule your country. The people knows what to do. Just like a pig, like a dog, like a horse, they know what to do. You don't have to interrupt them. Okay? They will do what, that's the natural way. So that's, Lao Tzu take 81 chapter to tell the prince, that's the way to do. And this one you can consider one of the 81 argument on that. So that's what I want to say. Yeah, thank you.
Thank you. Margarita, thank you for your patience.
Yeah, reading this, I have 2 points. One, I think this also gives clarity about Wu Wei, that the universe has its own course, and we're just a part of it, and it will be, it will grow. I mean, the way will make sure that we will grow, we will mature. Even though there are times, perhaps, like Evanik say, when children perhaps enduring abuse or violence, it's not easy for us to understand what happened, but eventually it is believed that Tao will give them life. And out of those paths that perhaps will be a bit mysterious. Now that's the second part that I feel intrigued with the word mysterious mentioned by Jason, even though it's profound, but it could also be like mysterious. Maybe we can't understand it, but the way will give life eventually. Yeah, the second point that I was intrigued was the profound, mysterious. This is almost similar like Christian faith to me. So as Christian, we believe that the one thing that can save us is the faith, other than love, faith that God will eventually make everything happen, even though we may not understand it. But that's why Christian faith is mysterious, because God will work in a mysterious way. So maybe we will endure with pain, with maybe to some extent we feel we don't grow at all. But there is this way, and I think by Taoism idea, we just need to believe that this will unfold itself, and what we need to be sensitive about, like Amon say, is what are the potential here? What are the chances that we can grow our virtue, our de during this process of the way with Wu Wei? That's maybe a bit scrambled, but that's my take from this reading. Thank you.
No, it's very interesting, especially the idea of Wu Wei and how you're extracting the potential of the world through non-action. I had not considered anything like that.
Effortlessly, I mean, effortless work, not non-action.
Yes, effortlessly. And actually, that's a very important distinction to make. But I had not considered that. So thank you for those comments. Kevin.
Yeah, thank you, Joe. I'm going to continue my grade about Wu Wei. It's actually last 4 sentences, but the last, I'm going to read especially last 4th, 3rd, and 2nd. Chinese, I'm going to read it. It's so important for me. This one is 生而不有，为而不恃，常而不宰. English we produce like if create without take claim, do without take credit, guide without interfere. So last one is about what's the virtue. This one about let's hear like definition about profound de or virtue. For me, it's if you hear like in Dao De Jing, it's sometimes lack the subject. If let's see use English, we use personification, water, air, qi. Finally, let's use water. You see, we born, we cannot like a human being, individual, be born, we can without water, without air, we cannot live. But it's never water take credit, no. We take for granted. Some animal water should be our mother or beginner. That's the next chapter going to see. And also air. They see if you qi, that's another. It's if you and in the even in Japanese is so powerful, and also in Indian yoga, if meditation, how to breath is key. When you get angry, you can breathe well. You don't feel calm, you feel happy, you breathe. That's air. But we take for granted. And another is back to the si. That's I think the one Kojak's. And also, if from English, it's very interesting that word. If in traditional Chinese way, it's as Jason mentioned that like waterfall on the top. They hold it. I think Miko here, when he play chess, it's not about I got a power, I got a queen. You got one queen, another side also got queen. However, how do you play the whole inner? You feel the pressure. That's about the Chinese way understand that let's see can Armand mentioned that potential energy that will be a bridge between the West and East. But in physics, maybe got a potential energy, also kinetic energy. That's two, our physics. So here, Si is important. Like we live long, like we live some people for individual. Some one day I have a beer or anything. Tomorrow I don't need to work. Some individual I look long term, 5 years. The plan. That's about long term Si energy. I'm gonna pause here. Thank you.
No, thank you for those comments. Very much. Katie, I do have a comment maybe after Katie.
Okay. I think it's another. I like Kevin's comment about that we're not really subjects. Also, like acting without expecting. I think it's a little bit different when we're reading, like, I don't want to get too controversial, but reading like the Bible series, and we're expected to give like sacrifices and maybe to worship and pray in a church. It's different. It's like, it's more like I don't know, maybe like marveling at it, but there's no expectation of having. It's the relationship's different.
Jason.
Yeah, I think 50 Live Ideas is reading John's Bible. Okay, so that's why a lot of people mention about Bible.
Sure.
Yeah, I think that's great, and I think that the John 1, right? John 1 verses 1 talk about in the beginning was the Word.
That's right.
And the Word was with God, and the Word was was with God. The Word was God, right? And the word actually in the original in Greek is logos, and in Chinese version, okay, when Chinese version of Bible, John, okay, the translation is Dao. That means at the beginning there's Dao, and the Dao with God, and the Dao was God. Okay, so that's the Chinese translation. So apparently the original Chinese translator, they translate directly from Greek, not from Latin or from English version. So I think that's a wonderful translation, just like since a lot of people mentioned about Bible. And another thing, Kevin talked about the play chess or Chinese Go. I think every Chinese play Go game, they will know. First thing they will know is Si. Okay, that's the potentiality, the layout, the condition you are doing it. That's very subtle, difficult to explain. One way to explain is when Chinese talk about castrate, okay, that means remove the Si, okay, so you can imagine what's the meaning of Si, okay, so that's another way to understand. If you remove your Si or some dog or some animals Si, that means castrate, okay.
Thank you for that, Jason. Aman.
Yeah, I wanted to actually hop on what Katie said there about the difference in demand, which I do think is something very profound about, I'll say Taoism with the caveat that you've got a few thousand years and millions of practitioners who have all done it differently. But in general speaking, it's not a carrot and stick rewards and punishment. It's more of a guidebook of, hey, these would be really good ideas for you to put in action. And if you don't, life might just be a little bit harder. There's no external punishment or external demand. They're all meant to be intrinsic, as naturally occurring as walking outside in the rain and getting wet. You can't, avoid that from happening, but for, hey, if you don't want to get wet, don't walk outside in the rain. And so, yeah, there is this dual sort of tension in the Dao De Jing of, look how amazing all of this actually is. And if you really understand it, you'll be marveled by it too. But you don't have to. You don't have to take my word for it. I think that's Taoism is one of the few religions on the planet I know of that doesn't have any proselytizers. And in fact, most Taoists really actually deter anyone from conversion. I've seen this firsthand, where you try to talk to them, they're like, this stuff's hard. It takes a lot of patience and attention. Why don't you go play with Confucianism? Because there's some real good, simple rules laid out there that you can follow, and you don't have to think too hard. Being put off and put off and put off, I think, is part of what makes Taoists gravitate to it all the more. It's rejection making the heart grow fonder.
Yeah, the moment that you institute a set of rules, I mean, I feel like you're getting away from the Tao, and it's actually taking you away from nature in and of itself. So that yes, this distinction between this external and intrinsic is really important to kind of notice the differences between how the West and the East often view things in general.
Again, that's on paper. In practice, there are plenty of Taoists with plenty of rules.
Okay. That's good to know. Thank you, Aman and Katie, for bringing that to. Evanique, do you have your hand up, or is that a number one? It's a little different there.
It might be a number one. I don't know. I probably
Okay.
forgot to hit shift.
That's okay.
But I was listening to Margarita and then to Aman. I mean, and so I was thinking ease, right? So, when Margarita was talking about, like, that we're on a journey with the universe, and then she was talking about it being effortless, or effortlessly is what she used. And I was thinking how much easier life would be if you just went with the flow. If you, and I don't mean like not working or not doing anything, but kind of like when you're learning something and you're learning how to do something, and then you get to a point where you're like just done with it and you don't want to go any further. You just can't do anything else with it. Like your brain, like it's like a brain block. And then you relax and do something else. And then all of a sudden it comes to you without seemingly any effort. And it's because you did the work, and then you just let it flow. And then, and then you just get it. Like it's kind of like getting the Tao, I have to say. You put your effort in, you read it, and then you come to this group, and then you talk out the ideas, and then it just kind of something clicks when it's supposed to, in its own time, in divine timing. And then you get it, and it's just almost effortless, right? And then when Aman said a guidebook, I was thinking like being graceful with yourself. Like, this is a guidebook. So if you think you don't get something right, or if you don't think you get something like the Tao would be, it's just a guidebook. Think of it that way. It's just a guidebook. It's like your guidebook with your journey to this universe. And like, I think of it as a guidebook to almost like what you're supposed to do. Like, what part are you supposed to bring to the universe and to people? And so I think that's the lesson of the Tao, is like flow. It's like effortless, like water. And like water has this force where it can break rocks if it wants to. It can knock down trees. You see what happens with the power of, and then when it combines with something else like wind, it can knock trees down. It's just a force. So when you allow yourself to be a force, in a sense, you don't force it at all. You just kind of let it flow, and that's it.
Thank you, Avanique. We have Kevin and Allison.
Yeah, got a two common. One is I just grab the Katie got it come over in animate objects, animate objects. I feel this way. They could be, that's as human being, our view, we see this difference. If you think about the micro level, from atom, molecule, even from they have a life. And also maybe you can consider a cell phase, like a bacteria, right? So they have life too. However, our human beings, not just a compute, also we collaborate. So that's a little bit off the topic. I mean, what I'm seeing focus is the object is object. In human beings, one object, water is, then one table, wood. We can sometimes see in common is if you keep it abstract. However, if based on Western value, we like the concrete examples, very specific. Give me specific example. That's our logic from it. If you turn, this is like top to top down. If from bottom up, okay, you can abstract. It's something in common. It's like 1 + 1 = 2. Thank you.
Thank you, Kevin. Great comments there. Allison.
I was thinking that I think one of the differences between this and Christianity is that because Christianity really lays out a whole set of rules and what you're supposed to do and what's going to happen if you don't do them. And I'm thinking a lot about Dante with that, but it's very rigid in a way. And that sometimes these rules that were written so long ago may not really work for today's society because things have changed. And I think what's nice about this is that this is really more of a guidebook. So like what Avanique was saying about it's just guiding you. And that actually makes more sense because every situation is unique. And so you have to figure out what to do in that situation. And 2 weeks later, you could be handed something else that's a very different situation. So it just makes more sense to have sort of a guide rather than a rigid, playbook, because one never knows with life exactly what's coming along. So it does make more sense to kind of go with the flow a little bit and figure out how to adapt to whatever life throws at you at that moment, because it may be very different from what challenges were, 2 years ago, or will be 5 years into the future. So that's one of the things I really like about it. I think it just, kind of makes sense a lot.
Thank you, Allison. Aman.
On this idea, I know I presented it first. I wanted to bring up just a little sliver of literary criticism for a moment, because one of the things that literary criticism looks at is who was writing for what audience. Right. And when you remember that this is an underling, whoever was writing these passages was an underling writing to someone with the authority to kill them at best, mutilate them at worst, then it's not a wise idea to be too dictatorial in what you write to this person. It's going to be much more effective to nudge, persuade, and just give some gentle sort of pushes without coming down too strong. Because that sort of, approach, while it may have worked, once or twice in Chinese history, generally wasn't met with really great responses from people who believed they were the son of heaven. So that accounts somewhat for the tone. And I do think it also accounts for why so many readers of it feel such an appeal to it, because if you consider who that audience is as a superior, then anytime we read this, somewhere in the background, in the tone, in the messaging, is this conceit that you, the reader, are the superior in this dynamic between the writer and the reader. And so it very much strokes our egos when we read the Dao De Jing by design. That's one of its really subtle, clever, crafty characteristics that I appreciated a great deal for.
That's a profound point. That is really, that's interesting, because that just expresses, when I read the Tao, how I feel. I feel like it's almost speaking to me, and that it's almost like kind of meant to me, for me. And it's because it's so free flowing, and it's a gentle, shall we say, a gentle nudge, as opposed to something that is much more forceful. And considering its audience at that particular moment in time, it's interesting just how it would resonate with all of us, because of the way it was written.
A lot of the other classic text or / holy text were often written by superiors to subordinates. And there, in that comes a lot of the tone of authority that I think, especially in our Western culture, in a modern world, rubs so many of us the wrong way.
Wow, that is, thank you very, very much for sharing that. That gives me a really a new way of looking at the Tao, and it helps me understand why maybe it resonates with me so soundly. So thank you for that, Aman. Margarita.
Yeah, I agree with Amon. When we read the text, you can also see it from the critical analysis when it's made, who the author, who should be the reader. But other than that, we also have a part of ourselves that we carry during the reading. So there is a part of ourselves that we project onto our readings. When we see a text as a guideline, so it's not detail or a manual as a very rigid sets of rules, that's actually, other than the text itself, it's ourselves that we put on the text. We make that text into a series of procedure. Because we made it like that. It's not just the text, because there's bidirectional relationship between the text and ourselves as the perceiver. That's for me. So for example, there are Christians who use the Bible as a regulation. Even the middleman create more regulation. Yeah, that can work for them. But some people also see this as a guideline. So merely giving ways of living your life in faith, or that's your relationship with the text. And I think Dao De Jing, with Jason and Amon and you and Sikan, give us this facility to receive a relationship with the text, and where we can see ourselves in this relationship. Yeah, I think that's quite unique. The second thing, what I think also about Wu Wei is, if I want to remind myself, because I'm a controller, so Wu Wei is not easy for me. So every time if I want to remind myself about effortless word, I feel like I'm in a series of learning and unlearning, and that's not easy. I wonder why. I mean, that's for Jason and Amon. Do you have an explanation why across our life as human, when we are a child, we were taught to master an environment. Even for cooking, you need to cook in certain hot. I mean, you need to keep the fire like this, and then you need to do mastery in math, in everything. But then you realize that the world does not come according to your plan or your mastering level. Then we need to some kind of unlearn to a certain degree about what we wish to be happening in our environment. Do you have an explanation on that? And thanks.
As far as having expectations, oh, go ahead, Ramon.
Oh, I was going to say, I don't have an explanation, but I do have a theory for why the appeal exists. And I think that in no small part, it has to do with a paradigm that believes in the great men of history idea, that there are single individuals whose presence in history are so singular that they turn the world around them. And there are some figures who could very compellingly be made as an argument for that idea. But the reverse idea of history is that these events would have happened with or without an individual. But because we have that great man of history model so baked into our culture, we want to turn out the next great man of history from every generation. If you can get a Alexander the Great, 2,400 years ago with that kind of education system, healthcare, and infrastructure, then darn it, I should be able to make my child a piano prodigy, whether she likes it or not. Unfortunately, the universe has its own plans, and it gets its laughs by watching ours.
Very well put. Yeah, it's interesting how stories, actually, the stories we tell ourselves can bring us a certain, desire to control things, or to, the way we want to be. And this is the way the world should be, because we start to hear other people's stories as opposed to just living our own. One of the great points that I always think about is that I'd read a book that said, don't try to be the next Steve Jobs. Don't try to be the next Mark Zuckerberg. They've already been. That's them. That's not you. And so, it's a very interesting point how these stories resonate with us, and then all of a sudden we think that we're in control of our own destiny somehow. It's really unfortunate. Jason, you had your hand up as well.
Yeah, I just have to thank Armand. He point out the relationship between the speaker and the audience, and that explained a lot of things. I think today I learned so much because of Armand. I never think about this way. So yeah, and let me think of a lot of things. Because I think Armand is very right, and then because this one is Lao Tzu is talking to the ruler. Okay, so talking to the powerful man. Okay, so and he has to be carefully use his word, and then unlike if we read the Mencius, okay, Mencius also talking a lot of time. Mencius also give advice to the ruler, but the Mencius they address, that's a dialogue. They say king, okay, they call him king, your lord. So you don't feel it, but this one, the text remove the subject. So they never say, okay, your lord, okay, your lordship, whatever. It never talk about your majesty, never say this word. So you feel like the Lao Tzu is talking to you in a certain way. So you have a special feeling. And that's very true when I read this one. And then most of the, for example, reading Confucius Analects, basically Confucius talking to his disciples. That's from superior talk to subordinate. So that's a different kind of feeling. And so I think Zaman point out that that's the very explain the reason why we read this one, because it's from the subordinate talk to superior, but without addressing Okay, so I think that's make this text very special, and then I think that's great. Thank you.
Yeah, I mean, I can't agree more. I couldn't agree more than express my gratitude for that particular point, because I don't know if I would have been able to articulate that. I knew it intuitively without like Aman's comment this evening as to why the Tao resonates with me. It does, but I think that the way you've articulated our relationship with the text and the audience actually really helps me, a little bit, gives me a greater understanding as to why it resonates with me personally. So I'm appreciative of that. David.
Yeah, thanks, Joe and Aman and Jason for these excellent comments, and Evanique as well. I mean, part of this is all about sort of comparative religion. Right. And I mean, I sort of wanted to expand on this a little bit more, that the Tao and Hinduism to some extent, I mean, are philosophies, as opposed to Judaism and Christianity, which are religions and don't have sort of a fundamental philosophy. At least Judaism doesn't sort of have I mean, there's philosophy built on top of it, but not philosophy that sort of underlines it, unlike Hinduism and Buddhism, Taoism. So it's very different in that way. And then again, expanding on this, who's the speaker and who's the audience? There's, I mean, as we're getting back to Joe, your comment about, Alexander the Great. I mean, these all came at different times in history and different contexts, which are, I mean, maybe we should talk to Srikant and have a whole course about this, even the comparative religion of this, but the sense that, not just who's the speaker and who's the audience, but in the context of, is this group the majority in the place they are? Is this group the minority in their place? Is the religion and the king, I mean, is the religion equated with the leadership, with the ruling class? I mean, again, you sort of look at Christianity and right. The Roman Empire when Christianity first started. I mean, when the books were written versus obviously being adopted later by the Roman Empire as the state religion. But and again, I'm less familiar with the Eastern tradition, but one of the biggest issues in the West, I mean, or Europe, I mean, around this time was the whole conflation of religions and power. I mean, you look at Islam and I mean, how that came about in Judaism and Christianity, even later on, of those being, very intertwined with the empires. And so it's, I'm less familiar with exactly how this works with the Tao, but just the context of trying to compare these religions, again, what mentioned before, and that Evanique was mentioning, of being this sort of authoritative or imperative tone versus this sort of calmer tone, and being sort of a suggestion. I mean, again, a lot of this has to do with, at least in Judaism, and who were these people? I mean, who were the authors? I mean, I always talk about, the history is written by the victors. I mean, so it's very interesting in at least Christianity and Judaism, which I know more about, of who these people were who wrote. I mean, Matthew, Mark, John, I mean, the books, and Acts and everything, and at the time they were writing, what their position was relative to the state and what the religion's position relative to the state was. And similarly with Judaism, if you getting into the controversy of whether it's written or not, but not by the hand of God and Moses, but if you sort of get beyond that, of the priests and where the priests were in society versus the kings of Judaism, and that whole evolution that was occurring. So it's I think that's I'm curious if Aman and Jason have any more comments about that, but how that aspect of it, beyond just a leader, but who exactly was, Lao Tzu, at least this history, this fable we have of Lao Tzu. And again, we've talked before about Lao Tzu, maybe being, a group of people, a collection of people, all attributed to Lao Tzu. We have this, idea of maybe some of these stanzas were written later on and collected, added in. This fable of who he was, but who, not just who is the speaker. I mean, in the personified as Lao Tzu and this, prince or king or this ruler, but also just where this philosophy stood in respect to the Chinese kingdoms, empires at that time, and what it meant in that context for them to be able to speak or not speak, or how they were describing it, how it would be accepted by the people. So that's just a whole other layers upon this.
I'm going to let Amans answer that, but we did cover that a little bit, as David had already mentioned.
And it's a huge question because it's, hundreds and hundreds of years of history. I'm going to give the most truncated possible answer I can. Lao Tzu wasn't a Taoist. He didn't think so, at least. He didn't know of such a thing. Zhuangzi wasn't a Taoist because it still wasn't around. Taoism as an idea comes around because a man named Sima Tan, who is the father of the great historian Sima Qian, who wrote the first gigantic history of everything, invented it. He invented it in a missive to the emperor saying, here are the schools of old that some great people thought of. And he invented all kinds of terms that we throw around very loosely now, like legalism, like Taoism. The only school I think that was actually a school was Maoism at the time. And the root were what he later became called Confucianist. But he invented this, and he said, and the Taoists are the best because they take the best parts of each of these schools and they mix them up and produce something really great. And his idea was received lukewarm. That's the best way to put it. It was kind of like a, because he was inventing something new, but casting it in the guise of something traditional and ancient. Like he said, the legalist philosophy came out of the ancient jailers of the Zhou kingdom and a bunch of other very novel ideas to try and legitimate his idea. So Taoism as a force within the empire wasn't very strong. And then it caught on a bit amongst the intelligentsia who got these texts that he pointed to as Taoist text and read them and said, hey, there's something really good here. And then when emperors would come along, it was almost a wise PR move for them to say, no, I'm really sticking with some of these Taoist principles because these are the wisest principles. I'm surrounding myself with the most ethical Confucianists. And we've done away with that barbaric, legalism. But incidentally, if you insult me, I will have thumb screws put to you and have you put on trial by torture. But it's not legalism. It's the kinder, gentler Taoist Confucianist version that's just legalistic in method. So this is how it sort of behaves politically. As a religion, it had a rebellion. The Yellow Turban Rebellion during the Han Dynasty is the one and only militant action of Taoist as a religious force moving hostily against a people. Never happened again because obviously they all realized kind of a terrible idea. And what Jason was saying earlier about this notion of Xuan, which that profound, mysterious, dark, becomes a seminal piece of consideration and study amongst many of these people, both scholars, former religious zealots, former iconoclast, who take it to mean this profound is the mystery that needs to be plumbed. It needs to be looked at more deeply, which leads to Neo-Confucianism in like the 3rd century, 4th century, CE. So it was new again almost 1800 years ago. There's all kinds of ways this develops over hundreds and hundreds of years. Very few people would be able, you could point at and say they called or identified themselves as a Taoist, but casting back, many a scholar has looked and said, oh, that person was very influenced by Taoism. And we see evidence of it from here, from there, from this angle. One of the few I can think of who really was kind of a self-identified Taoist was Ge Hong. And even he would say, yeah, but I'm not really good at it because I'm too busy to actually take time to just let things be and follow the way. I'm too busy trying to understand everything in the world. So that's the truncated version of Taoism in China as it develops. You don't have one key figure. You don't have anyone necessarily taking credit very often. And when we look back a couple hundred years, we look at people and go, oh, look how Taoist they were. Beautiful, just absolutely marvelous.
Right, but Amon, I mean, thanks very much for that really great succinct explanation, and history of how this came about. I mean, I'm sort of extending this even more. If you look at, for example, in Judaism, even ignoring sort of Hezekiah, I know this is a Jewish lecture, and his reformation of Judaism, especially later with Christianity and Judaism, the Pharisees and the Sadducees. You have the Sadducees basically associated with the priestly elites and the money, and the Pharisees is somewhat of a rejection against that and a challenge against the Sadducees, from which created rabbinic Judaism, and then and you go into the Jesus's comments about that. I mean, similarly in Hinduism versus Buddhism, where you have the Hinduism were these Brahmins, these elite priests, and in many ways the Buddhism was espoused and supported by in India by the merchants. It was actually sort of a revolution against the control of Hinduism, and was adopted for political and economic reasons of these people as a practicality to throw off the restrictions. Again, sort of the Pharisees were trying to throw off the restrictions of the Sadducees. They're actually a political party. So that gets back into this question: is sort of answering. I mean, not child, but just how this, not so much a question, but just presenting this as food for thought of how Taoism, as you said, I mean, you start out with Lao Tzu and the philosophy versus Taoism as the religion, and how the religion came about with these great leaders that you mentioned, and was adopted by the elites, adopted by the people. I mean, it all comes down to these. I mean, it resonates with, you can say that it resonates, I mean, with Joe and many people here for, philosophical, intellectual reasons. But a lot of this that happened at the particular histories in time, I mean, periods in time, were due to certain political, I mean, games the wrong way, but certain political sort of shuffling that was going on in these societies, and benefits of the various kings, rulers choosing a religion versus another. I mean, you get back to the Khazars again in history of Europe, sort of choosing Judaism as a neutral case against the European empire, Roman Empire with Christianity, and the Islam in the Saudi Peninsula, and they needed sort of a third neutral place for trading between them. So it's that's always the motivation for these.
So there is an ebbing and waning of Taoism in favor, out of favor amongst the emperors of China. There's a few really low points and a few really high points. Actually, the Mongol invasion and the Yuan dynasty were one of the few times where it was sort of lauded as the best amongst all, which is really strange because Kublai Khan allowed everyone into the empire. But as far as being caught up in the political machinations, it wasn't quite the same. The emperor was the highest devotional figure of the Chinese people, regardless of which gods he worshipped, attended, paid attention to. Most people still treated the emperor as the highest possible good, or the highest possible figure of religious significance to the kingdom. And you only get some controversies when an emperor would sort of veer away from indigenous Chinese religion. When one decides to become a patron of Buddhism, that was a big controversy at the time, but it didn't have the same upheaval force that like the War of Religions in Europe did, because there were certain underlying tenets wrought out from Confucianism that was a more secular, less religious, though it did have religious components to it, that helped to undergird the continuity of the Chinese dynasties. But the distinctions between a political frame, a philosophical frame, and a religious frame that we make very distinct in Western culture were much more amorphous, membranous sort of things in the East, where you can't exactly say when something was philosophy versus when it was religion versus when it was political. They very much overlap within each other. And only as dynasties changed hands do you get mighty upheavals, but usually the three pearls, Confucianism, Taoism, Buddhism, stay consistent through China's history for 1700 years.
Interesting. Is there a book or a source that either Jason could Jason or Armand could recommend?
Tons. I'll let Jason feel.
I have a wonderful book I always want to introduce, but it's so difficult. Okay, I will call that. There's a novel. Okay, created in the 17th century called the Red Chamber Dream. Okay, that's the humongous 120 chapters. It's humongous, and I read over again and again for the last 40 years. That talk about love story, and I always believe that's the book. Okay, you can fully understand the Chinese culture about the Confucianism, Taoism, and Buddhism. They all mixed together. Okay, how you behave, everything together. But that book, even most of the Chinese, I mean, the people speak Chinese in today, probably people not read it. Okay, because it's just like Dante's comedy. Yeah, it's like two people just don't have the patience to read it, and I was lucky, and I think that's the wonderful book to understand. In my Asian philosophy group, constantly have the people request whether or not we can introduce this one. I have been thinking for a while, and I think one day I will figure out a way to do it. Okay, but I think that's the best way to understand. It's a novel, but if you get through it, you probably will know what these three, the Confucianism, Taoism, and Buddhism, how they act together in the traditional Chinese.
And can you repeat the name just once more? Could you repeat the name? Red Chamber Dream. Okay, Red Chamber Dream. Okay, that's one of the translation. Another one probably called the Story of Jade or Stone, something like this. But Red Chamber Dream, Red Chamber Dream is the book, you know. And I can talk about this one for 3 days, you know. Well,
I really love this one. But if you describe it, it's a very boring story. Just one boy and then the triangle love between he and his two cousins. Okay, that's it. So, but it's a wonderful story if you know all the deep, you know, the deep. One thing I like to comment is about the what Aman said. I so amazed. I don't know how much Aman know. Every time it surprised me every time. So I think he probably know more than 90% of people of my Chinese Asian friend about Chinese history. That's great. So one thing I'd like to know that I noticed a big difference regarding the philosophy. In Western, in Western tradition, we keep break out, right? We have that stuff from Plato. Then Aristotle kind of like his student, but become a little bit different. Even in Christian, we have the Reformation and then keep changing, okay? And they say, I'm different than this. But Chinese is different. They try to combine everything together. And that's the difference. And if you use the Western philosophical idea to look at the Chinese idea, you will find out it's very strange. But the situation is this, because for example, Dao De Jing and the Zhuangzi, in my point of view, they should not put together, but the Sima Qian put them together and call it Taoism. Because if you read Zhuangzi, of course, Zhuangzi praise Laozi a lot, but in Zhuangzi also talk about Hui Shi, okay, Gongsun Longzi, talk about Confucius, talk about many people. But Sima Qian just put them together because their thinking are similar. So people start to think together. During the near Confucianism movement, about 13th, 12th century, the Confucian scholar also bring the Taoism into Confucius teaching, because the Confucianism teaching lack of metaphysical thinking. So they put the Taoism thinking inside. So put everything together. And then when Buddhism has been introduced in China at the beginning, the scholar in China try to reject Buddhism. But after a while, they kind of like bring Buddhism in the school. So that's how everything changed, And so if you look at the Western way to look at, try to categorize everything, that you find out that you always fail. I think that's one thing I'd like to point out, And another thing is about political. Just Aman said, the Chinese, the emperor always the son of the heaven. So doesn't matter. There's no like orthodoxy religion as long as you follow the mandate of the heaven, everything will be fine. But some clear thing is in the early Han Dynasty, they are using Laozi or Taoism, put this way, philosophy in the political science. Later on in the Song Dynasty, Song Dynasty, the emperor usually are the believer of the mystical Tao, I mean the religious Tao. And these two emperor is a little bit, have a religious flavor, but it's not much. Not like if you put in the Western thinking that like British have a different religion, France, they have a different way of Christian. That's totally wrong. It doesn't have this kind of flavor.
Since I can look at the clock and know we won't have time for chapter 52, I just wanted to say a little bit more about this religious concept, because it is actually a really controversial one amongst scholars, whether or not there is such a thing as a religion. What constitutes a religion? Does Confucianism count? What about Japanese baseball? Doesn't that qualify? I have read all these stories.
It does, by the way. No, I'm just joking.
I think there are some who would probably agree with you. The idea that it can be something discreetly plucked out is very Western. It comes from our categorization. Even this sort of like deep literary dive into a quote unquote religious text would be a relatively foreign idea to most Taoist practitioners in the East, because the text is not the most sacrosanct or most, penultimate expression of their religion, their devotion, their faith, their practice. Very often it has to do with the rituals you perform, the observances you do, orthopraxy is much more predominant within Eastern culture than orthodoxy. That is a very Western way of thinking about it. Now, having said that, most Taoist temples, you'll find a copy of the Dao De Jing somewhere. You might also find a copy of the Heart Sutra or the Diamond Sutra. It would not be uncommon. Every once in a while, I've gone to a Taoist temple and snapped a photo and shown somebody, hey, who is this god? And they're like, I don't know, that's got to be local to that region, because that's not anyone I've ever seen before. So even Taoists don't agree about what Taoism, quote unquote, is. It has developed so many expressions so vastly across the planet, and we're in the midst, even in something like this, of watching a latest iteration of it develop out of the West in only about the last 50 years or so, which when you think about the inception of something is pretty young. But in the West, Taoism finds its way to us by counterculture, Jack Kerouac and the Dharma Bombs, and figures like Alan Watts, and a couple of expats from China who brought the ideas here. Chia Tan and my teacher, Chuliang Huang, were people who left China, came to the United States, lived here, and when they introduced Taoism here, they did it in this idealized, hybridized way. That's kind of the version that most of us get here. And so when we try and talk about what Taoism is, it's interesting because it is this now here in this iteration. But there are a lot of Taoists who go on pilgrimage, for lack of a better term, to China. And I've spoken with Chinese Taoists who are like, I don't understand what these people are talking about at all. This doesn't make sense. They don't know any of the rituals. They don't know any of the routines. So there's this huge gulf culturally that exists, even though there's a commonality of sort of precepts and tenets that when you get to talking about those, well, do you think Wu Wei? Oh yeah, Wu Wei is great. We think that's a great idea. I don't know where you got it from, but we got it from here. And you can have some incredible conversations about it. But they do think it's all a little too loosey-goosey here in the West, and we should just settle down and get ourselves some good temples and start doing it the traditional way. Whereas tradition isn't what Taoism was about in the first place. It used tradition as a guise for introducing new ideas. And if there's one thing I could say pretty universally about Taoism over the centuries, it was that. It was innovation couched in the drag of tradition so that it could be palatable to the masses. Maybe not at first, maybe you have to do it for a couple hundred years until it does become an actual tradition, and then we'll accept it. But Taoists, if anything, were patient and persistent. And that's probably the best lesson that comes from the Dao De Jing and from Taoist tenets, is patience and persistence is going to get you a lot further than Herculean efforts that leave you deplete of any reserves.
That's wonderfully put, because it's just, in a sense, patience and persistence are, otherwise, if we're not patient and we're not persistent, we're like kind of almost resistant and hanging on to things. So, as opposed to embracing them. So I really, really appreciate that. Did you have something you were going to say, Aman? Or
Just evidence of that, during the Maoist Revolution, Taoists were nearly eliminated. That's one of the few times where they were deeply and harshly persecuted. And one of the great strategies, other than fleeing, which is where a lot of them wound up as a diaspora around the world, the other flight was to just go into the hills. There were stories through these 80s and 90s of Taoist hermits coming out of the mountains to discover, oh, the revolution's over. Okay. Going back to their temples, opening them back up, sweeping them out, and just picking up where they had left off 20 years ago. This was sort of a commonly reoccurring story from China for decades. The last time I heard about it was like 2004. And it's all somewhat folklorish, but there is an element of truth because there are Taoist hermits, and some of them did seem to successfully sit out the entirety of the Mao era.
So I have Evanique, then Jason. And then-
I just have a question. It was from what Ahmad said a little bit ago, and I think it still relates. So, I guess my question is: does government really create religion, in a sense? And the reason why I say is because we were talking about, the authoritarian view of some organized religions, where it's kind of like the top down. And I guess that's why, if the government is a creator of the religion, I guess that's why Taoism isn't as well known, or it's integrated into other religions, because maybe it's a governmental. If the government is creating religion, they're having a certain message that they want to get out. So I just wanted to know Amon's thoughts on that, and it's not fully formed.
That's a very, very complex question. Jason or Armand, do you want to take a crack at it? I mean, I can, but
I can. Okay, so first, I don't think government through the tradition 2000 years, any Chinese government ever create a religion, okay, or sponsor a religion, okay, other than Confucianism, if you want to consider it's a religion, but it's not. So they have a crime called slander Confucianism. Okay, so if you criticize, okay, and just like blasphemy, okay, it's a crime. Okay, so traditionally, okay, so that if you want to call it a tradition or it's a religion. So I don't see any government. They have some emperor believe or dedicated to Taoism, whatever way. Some do it for some believe. Most commonly in Song Dynasty, a lot of emperor believe they are the incarnation of certain god, okay, Taoism god. So that's the situation. But never have a situation like the government sponsor this one. But they have so usually it's stay away from religion as long as you don't rebel against the government. So always have some sect, just like a yellow turban, okay, and then later in Qing dynasty, they have a different religion. They have constantly, they use religion to rebel against the government. Okay, so they have the government have to suppress them and forbid that sect of religion. And usually the sect is the Taoism sect or Buddhism sect. So that's the thing. Compared to Western, it's totally different situation. Yeah. And one thing I just continue from what Aman talked about, the Taoism Temple in China. I don't know, China still have Taoism Temple. I talk about real Taoism Temple, not government-sponsored temple. So I don't know. Okay, but in Taiwan, still have a lot. Okay, in my hometown, I'm not talking about Taipei. I talk about this Taoyuan. That's a town next to Taipei. 3-4 years ago, I visited there. The place I grew up. My primary school. The front door have one Taoist temple. The back door have another one. And before I thought far away, but right now I'm an adult. I walk just like 3 blocks away. They have another big one. And just within like 1 mile, I think there's 4 temples. And I'm talking about the Taoist temple. It's a real temple. It's a lot of money, a lot of people worship there, and they have a lot of God, statue over there. I cannot recognize who is who, because probably nobody know, just look different. So that's all very active. Okay, they're all very active Taoism temple, and I know Amman has a lot of interest on that. So hope one day I bring Amman over there to see it, and so that would be very interesting. And that's really active, really active. It's not like some government sponsored tourist area. No, I'm talking about very active. People constantly over there. I think my mom still visits. One of the temple. She believes that one help us. So that's had been still going on in Taiwan. Yeah.
Thank you for sharing that. So I have Kevin, and then I think we'll call it an evening after that. I think we've only gotten through one, but this has been a very, very good conversation, and I appreciate Amon and Jason's comments because they've actually given me deeper insights to the Tao itself as to why it resonates with me, and this is a really meaningful conversation. Go ahead, Kevin.
Thank you, Joe. I first value the Avnik question. So
yes,
that's a question forever, and for me, it could be mutual relationship. Anyway, I'm going to answer Jason about mainland China. They have though, like 2019, I've been there, visit a couple of them. They use like VU tourists. You can go there. You need to pay the tickets, go there, like sell for, like run as business kind. And the money is some instructor, investor, they build or build a new. It's but however, yeah, like government, I would say loose relationship for religion, between religion to government. I would say it's not, yeah, not at least not a very active part. Yeah, I'm gonna thank you.
Thank you, Kevin. Amon.
Yeah, just one last word specifically about what I typed into the chat, because Evan asked a great question about religion, and the response I put there was one that was said to me: a religion is a cult that has a navy, which is an interesting idea, because before the 15th century, even the West didn't really think of themselves as religions. They thought of themselves as the bearers of a truth. And it was only with expansion and interaction with other people and suddenly going, oh, you do this different, that even this notion of something as religion began to develop in the West. It's not as antique an idea as I think we believe it to be, because all the brickwork was there before the label was. What Kevin was saying about the temples in China, he's absolutely right. They are, tourist attractions. They're government sponsored. You do have to buy a ticket. And there are Taoists who complain vociferously about what it's like to be a Taoist now under government sponsorship. There are many of them who really dislike it, though quietly, in terms of who they'll say it in front of. But you can read interviews and find people who are saying that. Jason's right. A lot of the Taoists who fled under Mao fled to Taiwan. It was right there. It's one of the reasons Taiwan has the highest concentration in the world. But Taiwan has the highest concentration, China the second, New York has the third, London has the fourth, and Vancouver has the fifth. But the oldest Taoist temple outside of China is actually in Marysville, California. It's called the Bakay Temple, and it was built in March of 1880. I actually visited there. It's a very interesting temple to go to. And it probably speaks to me mostly how Taoism has operated within societies, which I think may give David just a little bit of a better answer. That patient persistence has meant that generally speaking, it's sort of operated on the substructure of society, gently introducing an idea to where we get to a point in Western culture where we throw out terms like yin yang, and anyone knows what that means. They may not even know where they get that idea from. Some of them may have a vague notion it comes from China, but it came from China by route of California during the gold rush and has just inundated our culture. There's a lot of these sort of ideas that I think how Taoists prefer to operate within societies, which is put the idea out there, let it grow of its own accord, let the people take it up in their own time, and watch how it germinates within a whole new field, a whole new culture, which is beyond your singular ability to predict, but you can plant the seeds today. So yeah, I hope that gives some context, but Jason, if that opportunity to join you in Taiwan ever comes up, I will take a sabbatical. I am happy. I love to go. I got it. Speaking of, run. It's been great talking with you all. Thank you for another stimulating night. I'll see you all next week.
Thank you, Aman,
Thank you,
for your
Aman.
comments, and
you.
thank you everybody for their
Plan
comments.
on.
And if I win the lottery, I'll promise to send both you and Jason on that trip.
I'm glad I waited to hear that. I'm going to write that one down. This was recorded.
This
so-
is recorded. Absolutely. Oh, I promise. I promise. Absolutely. So
Digit.
take care. So yes, while you know, we only got through one of the verses, I think we had a fantastic conversation this evening. I want to thank Jason again, and Aman, for all their efforts and everything this evening, and everyone that attended this evening as well. Your comments were great, David, Evanique, you know, Kevin, Katie. I really appreciate everybody. I'll just make a quick announcement about some of the upcoming events. Tomorrow evening, we have the Ethics of Learning from Experience, and that's part of Comprehensivist Wednesdays. That's done in conjunction with the Greater Philadelphia Thinking Society, and that is tomorrow at 9 o'clock. And Thursday at 7 o'clock, there's a wonderful meetup, and I don't see Jeff here, but Jeff is leading a meetup on leading change, the future of leadership with Jeff Nugent. It's really been one of our most successful series. It's in this particular meetup is going to be very good. He has a set of exercises that are really allow you to understand how to be, why being inclusive when you're talking about leading change in an organization is so important. Why inclusion is just, it's a critical aspect to not only as far as from a humanistic standpoint, but also from a standpoint that you can also just get ideas that you would have never been able to think of otherwise. And Thursday is also the Gospel of John, chapter 4, verses 27 to 54, I'm guessing. That is correct. And so we'll be combining the Bible with Thomas Aquinas in that particular meetup. And I think we'll be focusing on lectures 2 and 3 of Aquinas. So let me see. I think Friday is the well, actually I don't have the next one, but the Friday is the Bhagavad Gita, and I don't know what chapter we're up to. Yeah, oh, it's chapter 4. Okay. Towards the Yoga of Knowledge. So that is on again on Friday evening. And then yeah, so keep an eye out on the website as well for any other upcoming events. But thank you everyone for this evening. I look forward to seeing everybody again next week, and everybody have a wonderful week.
You too. Thank you, Jason.
you.
Thank you, Joe.
Thank you.
Okay, bye.
Thank you, Jason. Thank you, Joe. Bye.
Thank
Okay,
you.
bye.
Take
Thank
care.
you, Joe.